I was 34 years old when they handed me the rifle and told me to shoot my own people. They didn't use those words, of course. The officer said, "You are now in a barrier detachment of the NKVD. Your duty is to protect the line and uphold order. Do you understand?" I nodded. He didn't ask if I agreed. No one ever asks that in our country. It was August 2nd, 1942. The 64th Army was in retreat west of Kalach. The Germans were pushing hard. Panzers, artillery, Stukas howling overhead. Our men were running, some of them barefoot, some without rifles, many without hope. We were posted along a ravine just east of the Don. 14 men in our detachment, 2 Degtyaryov machine guns, a single truck full of ammunition and vodka. Orders were clear. Anyone fleeing without permission was to be shot. The first man who came into our line wasn't even running. He was limping, blood down his sleeve, mud on his face. A young lieutenant, maybe 23. He didn't look at us. He looked past us, toward home, toward anything but this madness. I raised my rifle. My finger trembled on the trigger. I told myself he might be a coward, that he was abandoning his comrades. Then he spoke, just 2 words. "Ya proshu," I beg you. I pulled the trigger anyway. The shot echoed off the ridge. He dropped without a sound. I still hear that echo when I sleep. My name is Nikolai Petrovich Leonov. I was born in 1908 in a small village near Saratov. We were poor like everyone else. My father was a blacksmith, my mother a schoolteacher, until the revolution. We had a little house with a leaky roof and a cherry tree that never bore fruit. I remember long winters, wet boots, the smell of boiled cabbage, and my sister Anya's laugh. She had the kind of laugh that could chase the cold out of a room. When I was 10, the Bolsheviks came through. The Red soldiers took our grain. The Whites came next and took our mule. Then the Reds again. By 13, I had already buried 2 uncles, 1 cousin, and my own father, shot by partisans for giving shoes to a deserter. Still, somehow we lived, or at least we survived. After school, I worked in a tractor factory in Saratov. Strong hands, quiet mouth, that kept me alive. I joined the Komsomol, then the party, not because I believed, but because not joining was noticed. In 1937, I was recruited by the NKVD. Just paperwork, they said. Clerical assistance, you're loyal, you'll be safe. I sorted arrest files, signed execution lists I didn't read. One day I processed a form for a man named Petrovich Leonov, my father's name. Different patronymic, different man. Still, I hesitated. The captain... June 22nd, 1941. The Germans crossed the border. I remember hearing it on the radio, and for once everyone stopped pretending. Even the officers looked afraid. I was assigned to a rear security unit attached to the 13th Army. We shot saboteurs, we guarded rail lines, and yes, we shot our own men if they disobeyed. At first it was easy. Orders were orders, and you could tell yourself that discipline saved lives. But then the casualties started. Whole divisions vanished in days. Men walked out of forests with torn boots and 1,000-yard stares. Boys, 17, 18, crying for their mothers before facing the German machine guns. And still we were told, shoot the stragglers, shoot the retreaters. Stalin's order number 227 would come later, but we already lived by its spirit. No step back. By August, the men in our detachment were hollowed out. We didn't speak much, just smoked, cleaned weapons, drank when we could. We made dark jokes. "Maybe we should shoot ourselves," said Mikhail, the machine gunner. "Let's form a new barrier behind the barrier," I joked back. "Call it the line behind the line behind the line." We laughed, but it felt like vomiting. One night we shot 5 men, all deserters. They begged, of course. They always did. One tried to run and was riddled with bullets before he got 3 steps. After, We sat around the fire, chewing on black bread. Mikhail played a song on a harmonica he'd stolen from a German. I remember thinking, I have become something I don't recognize, a weapon aimed at my own countrymen. That night, I wrote in my journal, not that anyone would read it. My hands are no longer mine. My heart, I don't know where it went. If this is patriotism, I want no part of it, but I dare not say that aloud. I dreamed of my sister. She was standing in a field of wheat, calling to me, but I couldn't move. My boots were stuck in blood. In the morning, word came down. The Germans were advancing towards Stalingrad. We were being transferred east, to the Volga. Another line, another order, another body in the scope, and still no way back. November on the steppe is not a season, it is a sentence. Snow covers the dead like a blanket no one asked for. Faces vanish under ice. Bones poke through thin coats. The wolves come at night. The real ones, I mean, but the two-legged ones, they were always among us. We were stationed near a supply road southwest of Stalingrad. The Germans had reached the suburbs. The Sixth Army was pressing hard toward the river, and behind them, we, the barrier troops, waited to do our part. We didn't call ourselves soldiers anymore, just shadows with rifles. That morning our squad stopped a small group retreating from the front. 3 men and a boy, barely 17. His face was frozen with fear. They had no orders, no officer. They were starving, bleeding, just trying to live. Captain Rogozin ordered us to line them up. The boy fell to his knees and clutched my coat. He said he'd been with the 308th Rifle Division, that his lieutenant was dead, that the Germans had tanks and flamethrowers, and that they were burning people alive in the buildings. Rogozin didn't care. He had papers from the commissar. The boy was a deserter. I raised my rifle again. I saw my own reflection in his eyes. This time I hesitated too long. Rogozin did it himself. After the Civil War, the new Soviet world rose like a strange dream. Everything was painted red and gray. Brick by brick, smokestack by smokestack. I worked on engines. Dirty hands, honest work. There were dances in the workers' clubs. We drank bad vodka and sang songs about tractors and Lenin. Once I kissed a girl named Ludmilla behind the boiler room. She told me I had sad eyes. I told her everyone born before the revolution did. She laughed. We were married a year later. She died of typhus in 32. After that, I didn't love anything for a long time. Just worked and watched, learned who to avoid, when to stay silent, when to clap the loudest. I saw neighbors disappear in the night, heard screams from basements, watched grown men write confessions they didn't understand just to make it stop. You survive by turning off parts of yourself. I became very good at survival. November 19th, 1942. The real war turned. Operation Uranus. The Red Army launched a pincer movement around Stalingrad, from the north and south. We weren't told until the morning it began. 3,500 guns fired in unison. The sky turned red. The ground shook. My ears rang for 3 days. Our unit was caught in the rear shock. Confusion, retreat. Orders scrambled. German columns withdrawing. Russian troops advancing. Wounded men screaming. And us, the wolves among sheep, trying to hold a line that didn't exist anymore. I shot a man trying to climb into the back of a medical truck. He had no legs. I don't even remember raising the rifle, just the recoil. After that, I vomited into the snow. Mikhail slapped my back and handed me a cigarette. He said, "You think too much, Kolya. Stop thinking." A week later, one of our own snapped. Alexei, quiet man, good aim, always the first to clean his rifle. He walked into camp with blood on his coat. We thought he'd killed another deserter, but it wasn't. He had found a farmhouse. Children and a mother hiding. The mother had food she wouldn't share. He panicked, shot her. He sat in the snow and stared at his boots for an hour. Then he started singing an old lullaby to himself. That night, he shot himself in the mouth with his own revolver. Captain Rogozin buried him behind the latrine. No words, just a curse and a shovel. December came like a knife, cold so deep your breath bled. Our boots froze overnight, skin split like old parchment. The Germans were surrounded now. Our Red Army tightened the noose around Paulus's Sixth Army, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like frostbite and the stench of rot. We watched Germans starve in their trenches, listened to their radios begging for resupply. But we didn't feel pity. We had none left, only numbness. Mikhail used to say, "I don't need heaven. I just want a hot stove and no orders." I told him that sounded like heaven to me. One night, a wolf came into our camp, a real one this time, starving, ribs showing, eyes like yellow glass. I held out a crust of bread. It sniffed, then walked away. I remember thinking, smart animal, knows when something's poisoned. Anya, if this letter ever finds you, know that I have not forgotten you. They made me into a weapon, a blunt instrument. I no longer know what side I'm on. Only that I have survived this long. The others talk of a new year coming, of victory. I don't believe in either, but I still believe in your voice, in your laugh echoing across the wheat fields. I hope you're alive, and I hope, wherever you are, you cannot see what I've become. They say the last German surrendered at 1600 hours on February 2nd, 1943. He came out of a basement near Mamayev Kurgan, frostbitten to the elbows, crying in a language I didn't understand. We watched him fall to his knees in front of a commissar, babbling, and then it was quiet. No artillery, no shouting, just the sound of the wind blowing through the burnt-out windows of the city we once called Stalingrad. Over 90,000 Germans surrendered. Most would never see home again. I didn't feel victory. I felt empty, as if something had died inside me too. We walked through the ruins for days, cataloguing bodies, German, Soviet, civilian. We slept near the Volga. Rats bigger than cats crawled over our boots. The Germans had called it Rattenkrieg, rat war. And they were right. We were the rats, and we'd eaten each other to survive. By mid-February, the counter-offensive had begun. The Don front pushed west. We retook towns like Oroshalovgrad, Kursk, and Kharkov. I was assigned to the 4th Guards Rifle Corps, not to fight, not yet, but to secure the rear. Another barrier detachment, new orders, same shadows. We were told to root out defeatist elements to maintain discipline. In Kharkov, I arrested a lieutenant for refusing to advance. He begged me, said his men were too weak. I locked him in a barn. Commissar Litvinov shot him the next morning. I didn't watch. I sharpened my bayonet outside. I could still hear the shot. When I was first conscripted in the summer of 41, I thought it would be like the films. Glory, marching songs, bright red flags. But they handed us rusty rifles and sent us west by cattle car. We were barely trained. My first kill wasn't a German. It was a Soviet artilleryman who refused to fire on his own coordinates. He said our own men were still too close. The commissar ordered me to shoot him. I obeyed. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I wrote in my journal, "This war is not between nations. It is between orders and mercy." In a village near Sumy, we found partisans had killed a Soviet officer in the night. Litvinov ordered the houses searched. Someone set fire to a barn by accident or on purpose, I never knew. Inside were women, old ones, a mother with a baby. I kicked down the door, but the flames were too high. The child didn't cry, just stared as smoke blackened the air between us. Litvinov said it was the price of war. Mikhail wept in the corner. He hadn't cried since we lost his brother outside Kalach. That night we drank stolen vodka and passed around a tin of rancid pork. Mikhail told a story about his father's goat, how it used to escape from the yard and steal laundry from the neighbor's line. We laughed until we choked. For a moment we were boys again. Not wolves, not shadows, just men trying to forget. I looked up at the stars and tried to remember Ludmila's face. It had faded. I couldn't remember her laugh anymore, just the way her hair smelled in winter. We marched again the next morning, more towns, more broken buildings. I don't remember the names anymore, only the faces. In April they moved us south, Belgorod sector. We were told to prepare for a German offensive, the big one, the final attempt to break the line. Kursk was the prize. Every day engineers worked like ants, laying mines, digging trenches. We were told the motherland must not bend, hold, kill, die, but do not break. Barrier units were posted behind frontline divisions like watchful parents, but we weren't there to protect them. We were there to make sure they didn't run. That month I wrote nothing in my journal, only one word again and again over the edge of every page. Enough. On May the 9th we executed a group of deserters from the 15th Rifle Division. One had frostbite still healing from Stalingrad. One was 17. The youngest screamed for his mother. Litvinov ordered him gagged. I pulled the trigger, but I felt nothing. No anger, no disgust, just a mechanical twitch. Mikhail vomited afterward. I didn't. Later that night, Mikhail asked me, "Do you still believe in anything?" I stared into the fire and said, "I believe in ending this war, however it takes." Before the war, I worked in a shoe factory in Tula. I met Ludmila outside a cinema. She was selling sunflower seeds in paper cones. I bought 5 just to hear her laugh again. We danced at a Victory Day celebration in 1940. She told me her brother was in the Red Army. She wanted to be a teacher. I wanted a quiet life, with hands that only touched leather and laces, not blood and bone. I wrote to her from the front in 41. No reply. Found out later her building had been bombed during the German push east. Nothing left, not even bones. By June, the line was alive with men, machines, and mud. Kursk, a city we'd barely heard of, became a legend in whispers before a shot was fired. We dug trenches deep enough to bury 2 generations. Mines covered the fields like seeds. I remember watching a boy no older than 16 laying tripwire. His hands were shaking so badly he set one off. They buried what was left of him in a tin box. I kept thinking, how many of these boys will I be forced to shoot when the shelling begins? Not because they're cowards, but because they're human. On June the 23rd, Mikhail left a letter with me. He said if he didn't make it through July, I was to deliver it to his mother near Smolensk. I read it. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. It said, "I no longer know who I am. I have killed my own." Mikhail stepped between them. He said, "If you shoot them, you shoot me." Litvinov raised his pistol. I shot first. It was over in a blink. Litvinov was dead. Mikhail was shaking. Ozerov stood in stunned silence. No one said anything. We just kept marching the next day like nothing happened. I knew then I had crossed my own line, not the enemy's, mine. The night before the storm, the sky was too clear. July 4th, 1943. Our commanders expected the German attack by morning. We shared bread and silence. One man sang a lullaby. Another carved his name into the stock of his rifle. I wrote one sentence in my journal. If I die tomorrow, let them bury me facing west. I wanted to look them in the eye. July 5th. Just before dawn. The ground shook like it wanted to run from the war. The Germans came with tigers, panthers, and Stukas screaming like banshees. We were in the second line, the plug, the line that plugged the gap when the front broke. For hours it was just smoke, fire, and steel. Nothing else existed. You couldn't think. You didn't feel. You just moved and fired and prayed your hands didn't freeze from fear. Mikhail and I carried ammunition between trenches. I saw men turn to red mist, tanks cooking alive, machine guns that wouldn't stop even when the gunner was dead. It was the largest tank battle the world had ever seen, and it felt like being trapped inside a furnace that burned everything but guilt. By the second day, our sector was bleeding. The 5th Guards Tank Army was pulled in to the south. The enemy wanted Prokhorovka, and we were told to hold the approach, no matter what. No retreat, not one step back. Those were not words anymore. They were sentences. They sent us lists of men who'd fallen back. Not captured, not killed, fallen back. We were told to shoot 3 of them to make an example. Mikhail refused. I said nothing. I couldn't. I was too busy seeing Litvinov's eyes every time I blinked. We moved out behind the 29th Rifle Corps toward a clearing west of Prokhorovka. It wasn't a field anymore. It was a graveyard of armor. Tiger tanks burned beside shattered T-34s. Some still smoldered. You could smell the oil, the flesh, and something else, like scorched fear. I saw a tank roll over a medic. I saw a gunner crawl out of a burning hatch with no arms. Mikhail was hit by shrapnel. I dragged him into a crater and covered him with my coat. He laughed and said, "If you're trying to impress me, you're late." The bodies were so thick, our men started using corpses as cover. That's when I knew we had become animals, or maybe something worse. By the 13th, the attack had failed. The Germans began to pull back. The fields were a rusted sea of dead machines and dying men. Some Soviets called it victory, but it felt more like surviving an avalanche by being buried in it. We were told to move forward again. No time to rest, no mourning. The Red Army didn't pause for funerals. I sat beside Mikhail as a field nurse bandaged his leg. He looked at me and asked, "Do you remember Ludmila's name?" I didn't know how he remembered that. I told him yes. He smiled. Then he slept for 14 hours. That night, I wrote a letter I would never send. It was to myself, to the man I once was. If you ever return, know that the world has changed. You have changed. You killed men for your own side. You spared the enemy. You loved. You hated. You obeyed. You broke. You are both victim and weapon. And if anyone asks what you saw at Kursk, just tell them, I saw hell, and I helped dig it. We left Prokhorovka behind on July 15th, but it never really left us. We took Kiev back on November 6th. The capital was a corpse with its eyes open. There were no cheers, only smoke, burned bridges, skeleton buildings. They told us it was a glorious victory. I only remember a dog chewing on a frozen hand. Mikhail was still limping. His smile had vanished with the summer. He smoked more, talked less. One night I found him staring at a broken piano in a gutted schoolroom. They said this was liberation, he whispered, but I don't see anyone cheering. Winter came without mercy. Again. The mud froze into stone. Boots cracked, skin split, and yet the Red Army kept moving. West. Always west. We were in the First Ukrainian Front now, assigned to clean-up operations around Zhytomyr and Berdychev, but there was no clean way to kill. Barrier troops were used to keep order behind the lines, to ensure that no one broke in retreat, but now we were chasing our own ghosts. Men who collapsed were left to freeze where they fell. I once saw a horse collapse from exhaustion. Mikhail walked over and shot it clean in the head. I asked him why. He looked at me and said, "Because I loved it." In January we passed a column of German prisoners, hundreds of them, frostbitten, starving, one with a bandage soaked in black. One of our men spat on them, another laughed. I didn't feel anything. Not hatred, not pity, not even satisfaction. Then I saw a boy, maybe 16, walking barefoot with frostbitten feet and blue lips. I gave him my bread ration. He didn't speak, just nodded. I never saw him again. Back home, before all this, my mother baked rye bread every Sunday. She used to hide a pinch of sugar in the center as a surprise. I remember the first time I bit into that sweet spot. I thought it was magic. Now I dream of that moment more than I dream of Ludmila. We were told to secure a village west of Shepetivka. They said there were Germans hiding in the barns. There weren't. Only peasants, thin, terrified, hiding in cellars. The captain insisted they were collaborators, ordered them out. A woman with a baby tried to explain, in Polish, I think. He shot her before she finished her sentence. Mikhail didn't blink. I looked at him, searching for something, regret, rage. He just walked away. That night I sat with my rifle across my lap. I cleaned it twice, then a third time. I thought about turning it on myself, not out of shame, not even grief, just silence. I wanted it to stop, the noise, the cold, the guilt, the orders. I heard Mikhail coughing nearby. I stood up, walked over, sat beside him, said nothing. We shared a cigarette, one of the last ones. And somehow that was enough to keep going one more day. In late February we received orders. Lviv, another city, another line to cross, another map to bleed on. Mikhail folded his coat tighter around him and said, "Let's not die in Lviv, Nikolai." I told him, "We'll die somewhere, Mikhail. Might as well be somewhere warmer." That was the last time we spoke for 3 days. The snow turned red, then black, then white again. People talk about war like it's a story with battles and heroes. But the middle of war, the frozen years, are something else. They are not glory, not purpose. They are just time, time stretched over pain. By spring, I no longer feared death. I feared surviving. On June 22nd, 1944, exactly 3 years to the day since Barbarossa, we struck back. Operation Bagration. They say we fired more shells in the first hour than the Germans had used in a month. The sky wasn't even sky anymore, just smoke and noise and thunder. Our orders were clear. Smash through Army Group Center and don't stop until we reached the Vistula. I no longer questioned orders. I didn't care where we were going, only how many we'd lose before we got there. By early July we reached Minsk. The Germans tried to hold the city, but they were surrounded. It wasn't a battle. It was a collapse. I remember walking through the ruins afterward. There were burned-out panzers, half-melted bodies, rifles bent like pretzels. Mikhail picked up a broken helmet. "So many uniforms," he said, "but the same meat inside." We were turning into ghosts who hunted other ghosts. Crossing into Poland felt like stepping into a bruise. The land was wounded, broken fences, bombed churches, eyes behind curtains. We liberated town after town, and still the people stared at us like we were something to fear. One boy threw a rock at our truck. Mikhail jumped out. I thought he'd beat the boy, but he just handed him a chocolate bar, taken from a German crate. "I don't want to be hated," Mikhail said quietly. "Not anymore." Before the war, back in 1936, I fell in love with a girl named Katya. She had sunburned cheeks, green eyes, and a laugh that could melt snow. We used to walk along the Volga, talk about everything and nothing. She gave me a book once, Tolstoy. I gave her a hand-carved comb made from pine. She wrote me letters in 41 and 42, then they stopped. I never found out if it was the Germans or the war itself that took her. Sometimes, when it was quiet, I'd read the last one again. It was just one sentence, "Come home safe, Kolya." On August 1st, we heard the Poles had risen up in Warsaw, the Home Army, civilians with pistols and dreams. We were across the Vistula by then, close enough to hear the fighting. They begged for help. Radios crackled with Polish voices, but our orders were to hold position. We did nothing. For 63 days we listened to them die. We lost Lev near Radzimin. Shrapnel to the stomach. He bled for 6 hours before going quiet. Mikhail and I buried him in a birch grove. No marker, no ceremony, just dirt and frost and silence. We said nothing, but in the dark I thought I heard Mikhail sobbing. I didn't comfort him. I just stared at the moon and wondered how many men we'd have to bury before someone buried us. In October we were finally ordered toward Warsaw, but there was nothing left. The uprising had been crushed, entire neighborhoods razed, bodies in the Vistula. I found a child's shoe in the rubble, just one, still clean. I couldn't cry. Mikhail did. He said, "They were waiting for us, Kolya. We let them die." I didn't answer. There was no answer. War teaches you how to forget, how to keep walking through smoke and bones. But that summer I began to remember. Faces, voices, regrets, the weight of silence. We had crossed the threshold, from defenders to destroyers, and the tide didn't just carry us forward, it carried everything else away. On January 12, 1945, we began the final push. They called it the Vistula Oder Offensive, a drive so fast it outpaced supply lines, 30 miles a day, sometimes more, towns, rivers, forests, all swallowed in snow and flame. The Germans were finished, but still dangerous. They fought like men who knew there was no one left behind them, no line to retreat to, no home still whole. Crossing into Germany was not what I imagined. The houses were neat, whitewashed, surrounded by frozen gardens. We found old men in militia armbands and terrified children in basements. Some smiled and offered bread, others hid rifles under floorboards. I remember walking through a village near Breslau. A girl, maybe 9 years old, handed me a photograph. It was her brother, a Wehrmacht soldier. She asked if he was dead. I didn't speak, I just walked on. Near the Oder River we found the camps, Majdanek, Chelmno, and later Sachsenhausen. The smell reached us before the fences did, bodies like sticks, piles of shoes, gas chambers that still stank of bleach. Mikhail vomited. I stared at a child's doll half buried in snow. We had known what they were doing, but we hadn't known, not until we walked through it. Mikhail looked at me and said, "They deserved every shell, every bullet, every drop of blood," and for a moment I believed him.
April 16th. Seelow Heights, the gates of Berlin. The Germans had dug in deep, bunkers, mines, artillery in every forest and hill. We attacked at night. Rockets lit the sky like the sun. It took 4 days to break through. We lost tens of thousands. Mikhail was wounded, shrapnel through his thigh. He refused to be evacuated, said he'd see Berlin if it was the last thing he did. By April 25th, Berlin was surrounded. We saw flames rising from the city like it was being consumed from within. Snipers in every window, Panzerfausts behind every cart. We went building by building, room by room. A boy with a Hitler Youth armband tried to stab Mikhail. I shot him. He couldn't have been older than 12. We were liberators and monsters. On April 30th, we reached the Reichstag, the symbol of their empire. The fighting inside was like a nightmare. Grenades in stairwells, machine guns behind statues. When it was done, Mikhail and I stood on the roof. The flag was raised. The wind caught it like a scream. He looked at the smoke rising from the Tiergarten. "We made it," he whispered. Then, as if finishing a sentence we'd started years ago, but were not who we were. May 8th. It was over. The Germans surrendered. Men cheered, women wept. Mikhail lit a cigarette with a shaking hand and stared at nothing. I thought of Katya, of Lev, of the boy in Warsaw, of the boy I had just shot. We had won, but I wasn't sure what we had saved. Years later, I live in a small apartment in Saratov. Mikhail visits sometimes. He walks with a cane now. We drink tea, talk about the weather, never the war. I keep the doll I found at the camp, and Katya's last letter, and Mikhail's Red Star medal. He gave it to me before surgery once, just in case. Sometimes school children come to ask questions. "Were you a hero?" they ask. And I always answer the same way. "No, I was a soldier." They called it the Great Patriotic War. We called it survival. I remember the cold, the screams,
the smell of wet wool and burnt steel. I remember marching into Russia as a blocking detachment, ready to kill our own men. I remember marching into Berlin and seeing our own reflection in the ruins. We outlived the war, but no one wins it. Not really.